Welcome to Stranger Things in the 1980s. My name is Vince Locke. I am your host. In this podcast, my guest and I take deep dives into the Upside Down, where we analyze each episode of the Netflix series along with related movies and books, and examine them in the context of 1980s America. This time around, I'm rejoined by Jason Szilagyi and new guest Kelly Coffey, who are here to talk about aliens. Hey everyone, Vince here. Before we get into this episode, I just want to say that any financial support you can throw our way would be greatly appreciated. Because this podcast is based on a college course and its primary purpose is to be educational, I don't want to commercialize it. I feel strongly that knowledge and education should not be commercialized. However, I am more than happy to accept donations. Now, we're still going to make the podcast because we enjoy doing it, and we're always going to do it for free, so don't worry about that. But if you want to support us, you can click on the link in the show notes, and we'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to Stranger Things in the 1980s. This week we're joined by my friend Jason Szilagyi again, and new guest and fellow stranger Kelly Coffey. So, Jason, you've been here before. Remind our guests or our listeners who you are and what you do.
Yes, my name is Jason Szilagyi. I am a professor of history at Delta College and Central Michigan University. Big Alien fan, so this is a fun one.
And Kelly, you're the new person. Who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Kelly Coffey. I'm also a instructor at Delta College. I teach college composition 1, and I have a theme of pop culture. So, this kind of fits into what we're kind of doing today. But I'm also a huge Aliens fan. I think Alien was actually probably my favorite movie of all time. It kind of has a very special place in my heart, as does Aliens.
Now, in your classes, correct me if I'm wrong, you do use movies in there quite a bit, don't you?
I do. Our second essay is a film essay, kind of like a film critique / analysis. And what we do kind of like in the couple weeks that we have is, I break down kind of like the filmmaking process, kind of like giving like a little bit of a crash course in filmmaking. And so we look at acting, we look at, cinematography and sound and directing, and I show clips that kind of correspond to that particular element. I always have to approve my students' choices because I never know what they're going to come up with. And, I would tell them,
that didn't occur to me, but yeah, I guess you would have to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, something like, I was telling them that, a movie like Paranormal Activity 5 or something, it's not, you might be able to get away with like maybe a page talking about like special effects or whatever, but then you got, several other pages to go. So students often get stuck. And so I just assigned them this past week to bring in a list of movie choices, right? And then I have to approve them. Sometimes I don't approve any of them. And I tell them, I often will post a film suggestion list too. So I have all kinds of films on there. I think I have Aliens on there. I have Alien on there, stuff that they can really write down on and do some good writing.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. And, I have had to call like moratoriums on like certain films just because I'm tired of reading about them, and it doesn't mean that they're bad,
right?
But it just means that, it's kind of like the easy pick. And I'm trying to get them to think a little bit out of the box. And
I think that's probably true of anyone who uses writing in their teaching. After a point, you just see the same subjects over and over again. So you're like, okay, no more of this. I got to keep it interesting for me.
right. Absolutely. Sometimes I get like really good papers. I know like last semester I had a student write about the Wizard of Oz.
Interesting.
It was really smart writing, and I've had students write about, I had one student write about Parasite. I think I had I had a student just this semester ask if one of her choices could be Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which I thought was like, wow, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I do get some good surprises, I think,
Awesome.
from the students' choices.
So today we're talking about a little movie called Aliens from 1986. When did you first see Aliens, and what are some of your memories of seeing the movie?
You want to go first, Jason, or?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I go first. Okay, I saw Aliens. Okay, so I have really awesome parents. If I ever wanted to see a movie, I was able, to pretty much go and see it. And I saw Aliens opening weekend when it came out
Nice.
with my mom. And before we went to see the movie, we actually stopped beyond just the 1986 part. The actual date, dating myself, there's a Walden Books that was in the mall. And before we went there, I ended up picking up one of the bookazines where it was the whole story of Aliens, the cast, the crew, the special effects, all the stuff. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, as soon as we get done watching the movie, I know what I'm going to be reading all weekend. And that was like, after seeing it the first time, I was just totally blown away. I was totally hooked. And I have to say, it's one of the best sequels that I've seen.
It is generally regarded as one of the best sequels ever made. Yes.
Yeah. I saw Aliens also opening weekend, and I saw it with my best friend from high school. And just a few years ago when I saw Alien with him, again, like Alien kind of changed my life. So I was really looking forward to Aliens, and also like Sigourney Weaver was kind of like my idol. So I had to go see it. I just remember I even remember like seeing the trailer. I just remember being like super excited about it, that it was just like it looked different, and so the anticipation was high, and it exceeded my every wish. And I think I saw it like 3-4 times or something. I went to Boston to live. I was only there for a few months, but I made sure that I went to see Aliens in Boston too with my friend Megan.
Nice.
It's just, it still holds its power, and like
It
Jason,
really does.
I would buy like Starlog magazines, and I don't know if Fantastic Films was still around, but I think Famous Monsters or something that had just little pieces, even like magazines with just like short blurbs. I would like, oh, I'm out, that would just make my day, and I'd have to buy them. But yeah, I was totally hooked in. So
Nice. I didn't see it opening weekend. I saw it in like 87 or 88. I saw it on VHS because we had VHS back then.
right.
And I don't think I saw the first movie until after I saw Aliens, but I was certainly aware of the first movie because one of my sisters used to collect these trading cards you used to get from different movies of the late 70s and early 80s. So she had a set of cards for Alien, a set of cards for like Superman the movie, Star Trek the movie, and all of those. And so I was very aware of the imagery and the story of what Alien was about. So Aliens was not what I expected based on what I knew about the first movie, which is really more a horror movie. And
Right.
this is a big time action movie. In fact, the tagline was "This time it's war."
Right.
And it fit in with the action movies I was seeing at the time with Schwarzenegger and Stallone and all those big action heroes. So it was very much of that time. But it still, I think, like you said, is a really good movie even now.
Yes.
But transcended the time.
Most
So
definitely.
yeah. I think the title is really clever. It's not Alien 2, it's Aliens. So by making it plural, it suggests not only is it a sequel, but also there are more than one alien, like from the previous movie. So I thought that's a really clever title. I really like that.
It's interesting that you brought up, like Schwarzenegger films and even Stallone. And I remember that Sigourney Weaver would kind of, or either ironically or playfully, kind of call her character Rambolina.
Yeah.
And with their short, kind of with their short hair, and just kind of like the scenes of, later in the movie where has the big kind of pulse rifle and is, shooting aliens and kind of looks like she's at war. So
yeah.
it's
And Ripley is one of the very few female action heroes of the time. So what do you think of the movie? What are some of your thoughts? What do you want to talk about?
for me, I think it's interesting in that, I think James Cameron is a little bit underrated as at least a storyteller in terms of his directing. It's interesting in that he wanted to kind of pay homage to the first film, but this second one is like completely its own. It's not, completely kind of following Ridley Scott's kind of slow burn.
Right.
But then again, I think he kind of pays homage in terms of, like, action films today. You have to have something that happens like within like 5 minutes or so. And I think like it's at least like maybe at least 15-20 minutes into the film, where we start to see the Marines and
Right.
their thing. And credit to Cameron for trusting his audience to be patient.
And I was rewatching the movie recently, and I watched the extended director's cut.
Mhm.
And the actual xenomorphs don't show up till almost halfway through the movie.
Yeah. I mean, if you
And
just
there's
count like the nightmare that she has, but yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and you do see, the face huggers earlier on, the chest burster, in the nightmare sequence, and that is one of the recurring themes of the movie is dreams and nightmares. So we'll get back to that. But yeah, the actual xenomorphs themselves, he holds off on showing them for a really long time, and really builds up the tension. I think it does a really good job of building up tension.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also come back to Cameron as a storyteller. I think it's important, and this runs through all his movies in that it's kind of like characters first, action second. You have to be able to care about the characters to
Hmm.
be interested in the movie, and I think he does a great job of that. I think he's been kind of like knocked for his dialogue, which
Yeah.
I kind of agree with that. He's not like the best dialogue writer,
Yes.
but he can still, he still has the ability to tell a really strong story. I don't think that's lacking in any of his movies.
Jason, what do you think?
I think he did a very nice job of putting together the almost, well, I will say a bit of the insidiousness of Weyland-Yutani
Mhm.
and the corporate culture that got built into
Yes.
everything, that, the United States Colonial Marines are almost a police force that go in to check this out. And I agree with both of you with the tension being built up. They have them do the flyover, they land, they go into the main building, the two squads,
Mhm.
and there's nothing. They've
Yeah.
missed it. They could see the aftermath, but beyond that, there's no blood, there's no bodies, there's nothing to indicate what had actually happened. And you're kind of seeing as you're watching Ripley's reaction, she is reliving that nightmare.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
reliving the fact that nobody is listening to her, even though she's supposed to be there as an advisor. Initially, no one is listening to her, and it's just like, if you just followed her advice a little bit,
Yeah.
probably
That
would have
is
worked out a
true.
little bit better.
Yeah, no one really listens to her until she takes action by taking over the tank vehicle. I'm not sure what they call it.
APC.
APC, yes.
Yeah.
So to try to help them get out of there. And even the lieutenant yells at her at first, but everyone else is like, okay, shut up. She's in charge now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to comment on Jason's thing about the kind of corporate, the Wayland-Yutani thing, and how, this movie's it was made in the 80s, and you can kind of still see that yuppie-ish look, with the weird kind of collarish suits.
Yes, it's Paul Reiser's character in particular. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Oh. In that corporate meeting where they're debriefing Ripley, and she's like, I don't know how many times you want me to say the same thing over and over again.
Right.
And it's like she didn't even stand a fair chance. They were trying to pin it on her and
Right.
figure out if there was something.
I mean, all of this, millions of dollars that was lost because of her. Right.
Yeah. And then the crew, talking about, the destruction of the Nostromo and, its crew. And it's like, well, first Nostromo, payload, then crew. It's like, oh, okay, we see how the
Right.
pecking order goes.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just harkens back to, the shot in Alien where Ripley's kind of trying to find out what the special code is. And it says the importance of the alien being brought back is the most important, and then crew expendable. And it's right.
Yeah.
But even in the first movie, Weyland-Yutani is sort of in the background there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more peripheral to the story itself. The focus is on the haunted house in space, as it was called.
Yeah.
Whereas this movie really focuses more on corporate malfeasance.
Mm-hmm. You hear it a little bit in the dialogue in the first Alien movie about, how they always mention the company, that damn company, what about our lives, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and forfeiting shares if we don't, do what we're supposed to.
Yes. So this time it's war. Why do you think Cameron chose to make this a war movie as opposed to just another horror movie? And that is one thing that's interesting, I think, about, a few movies in the franchise. I mean, at one point, it becomes a series of diminishing returns, but most of the movies have their own sort of character to it in terms of style.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I've heard that the Fincher, I guess, like what you call director's cut, even though he might not even refer to it as that, but is much more interesting than what was put on screen. But, I find that even though the other two aren't nearly as good as like the first two, I've always felt like that I could depend on Sigourney Weaver giving a great performance.
Yeah.
Even in like something like Alien Resurrection, which, is I love Juno as a director.
Yeah.
But he was, he's just the wrong director for that film, and that kind of quirkiness that he has. And he's, I know this is getting away from Aliens, but, it's not like Juno has not had dark themes to his films. You look at something like City of Lost Children, or even Delicatessen. Right?
Yeah, Delicatessen's one of my favorites.
Yeah, but they have this whimsy and uniqueness to it that doesn't quite fit the alien world, I guess,
Yeah.
That kind of hurts the film some. But as far as, like the war thing, I mean, we're still like the 80s are, I think people are still, I think, did Platoon come out in the same year? Or was it?
Close to it.
So there's still this kind of, with Reaganism, there's still kind of like, this kind of like rah-rah of, or maybe that's changed a little bit, since the 70s, because it wasn't the most popular time to be a soldier.
Right. And so, I mean, this was still Cold War America, as we've talked about several times on the podcast. And as we've talked about a little bit before, when we looked at Rambo, Vietnam was something which was very much in living memory at the time. So it was still affecting sort of America's perception and morality. I mean, we talked quite a bit, and many movies have talked about, PTSD and personal trauma as a result of Vietnam, but we don't really discuss sort of societal trauma that was caused by it as well. And I think this movie does attempt to do that.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, like in the first film, because it's so close to 79, which is,
Mhm.
you know, few years out of Vietnam, that there's still that kind of remaining cynicism about, you know, people in charge, people in
Yeah.
authority, not trusting. I think that still pervades aliens as well, as the company and the Weyland-Yutani company.
So for our younger listeners for whom Vietnam was so last century, and may not be very familiar with it, Vietnam was a proxy war for the Cold War. And Jason, I know you've got expertise in, you know, like military history and that sort of thing. Do you want to address that?
Mhm. Yeah. With Vietnam, just to give a quick general background and
Yes.
not, do a huge outlay here. Vietnam used to be a colony of France up until World War II. The Japanese ended up stripping the colony away from it. By the time World War II is over, there's this process that's called decolonization, where the major European powers are slowly starting to spin off their colonial possessions. And Vietnam is one of those territories. The French attempted to hold on to it. They fought a very bitter, very unsuccessful war to try to keep the territory together, which they lost in 1956. And Vietnam was split into two entities: North Vietnam, which was communist, South Vietnam, which was democratic in quotes, but it was it was Western aligned basically.
Yes.
And what started to happen was the Soviet Union started pouring money and equipment into North Vietnam. The United States, Australia, and some others were pouring money into South Vietnam. And what ended up happening is a civil war that ended up bringing in hundreds of thousands of foreign troops. In the end, in 1975, North Vietnam overwhelms South Vietnam.
Yeah.
And it is a humiliating defeat for the United States.
So, because the idea of the proxy war is, okay, you got the Cold War between the two superpowers, the United States and its allies, and then the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The US is very capitalistic and democratic. The Soviet Union is communistic. And part of the foreign policy for the US was containment of communism and the threat of communists to keep it from spreading. And so you would get these, it was a Cold War because even though there were open hostilities between these two superpowers, it never officially devolved into outright warfare
war between the superpowers.
Exactly.
You basically fought your wars in someone else's country.
Yeah,
and
you had someone else fight the war for you.
Yeah, and you get to see what your weapons can do, and then you either improve them or you keep what you have. At the end of Vietnam, it was a very traumatic time for society as a whole. You had, throughout the U.S. involvement, you had protests on campuses and at the U.S. Democratic Convention. Everywhere you would see this. And it was really one of the first times that you would have live footage from a battlefield.
Yes.
And so you had that, you could be watching potentially the news and see someone that you knew live, something happening to them. And there was the feel that, the corporations were making all this money off the war because the government's buying the weapons from them, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And you see things like Agent Orange showing up to go through and, knock out the florists in Vietnam. But at the same time, later on, and even while they're using it, you're finding out it's cancer causing. And there's even now, there's still the argument with the Veterans Administration for Veterans Affairs as to who is eligible to get benefits for Agent Orange poisoning.
Right.
And it's, you have to jump through a lot of hoops and hope you get the right person who's going to advocate for you, even if you have all the information to prove you were in this spot when this happened.
Yeah, and going back to that idea of social or societal trauma, America was so gung-ho after World War II and how powerful and strong we were, and we can kick anyone's ass. And then Vietnam comes along, and it is such a massive failure. It was extremely demoralizing for our society. And of course, there was the division in our society of those who were protesting the war and those who were still all for it. And, America, fuck yeah, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's still that idea of the good war.
Yes.
We're fighting because we need to. And then with Vietnam, it was like, there was the question, what are we actually fighting for?
Yes.
Not to mention how soldiers were treated when they came back.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how does the movie play into this idea of Vietnam and post-Vietnam America?
Well, it does a very good job of, like, when we're looking at the squad, that the groups, the platoon that Ripley is going to be attached to, it appears that many of those, just the grunts, are, and NCOs are experienced. They kind of they understand, the difference. What kind of a mission are we going on? What are we going to do? And then you see the new lieutenant come in with, and they're asking, Ripley asks him, how many combat drops have you had? 38. And how many combat drops? 2, including this one. And it's you could see immediately, they already knew they didn't like the guy, but it was like the confidence just completely melted away.
It's like, how many operations had he been on? So I'm like, 27 or whatever, simulated.
Right.
Yeah.
That point is made.
Yeah. And they're like, oh man. And it was interesting too, because he's not with them in the field. He's in the APC, giving them, he's looking through their body cameras, basically real time, and trying to come up with a strategy for him, but he doesn't actually explain what he wants them to do.
Right.
He's still like proceed,
or why he wants them to do it.
Yeah. When he tells them we can't have any firing there, it's like, okay, give him the explanation for why.
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking too, and that it kind of harkens back to the like you were saying about Vietnam being on the live news at 6 o'clock news, and I think that's some of where the most suspenseful, absolutely riveting parts of Aliens comes in, and just looking at the POV of those soldiers, and the fact that when they lose somebody, it's like they lose their sergeant, and Hicks comes back and says, where's a Apone? And Hudson, like, he's gone, let's get the fuck out of here, but it's absolutely, it feels, I think that's what Cameron does great in this, is that it feels real.
Yes.
If it has that kind of real, kind of gritty, live, it's happening.
You feel like
a feeling, and
you feel like you're part of it, because you're seeing what they would be seeing.
Yes. And so our Marines here, and I thought it was interesting, there are 12 Marines, which to me makes me think of the Dirty Dozen. I don't know, Kelly, maybe if you want to address what the Dirty Dozen was.
It's been a long time since I've seen it, but sometimes I get it mixed up with, what's the other one? The Great Escape.
Oh, okay. Both World War II movies.
Kind of, The Dirty Dozen is Lee Marvin, and The Great Escape is Steve McQueen, right? Well, I don't know why I keep thinking Steve McQueen is in The Dirty Dozen, but he's not.
Okay. So Dirty Dozen, a bunch of soldiers who are prisoners, U.S. prisoners. They violated the rules of combat, or whatever it is that they were in prison for, and they're given the opportunity to earn their freedom by going on a suicide mission. Very similar to Suicide Squad, right? If you're familiar with the comics or those recent movies. So 12 Marines made me think Dirty Dozen. This is a suicide mission. And those Marines are very gung-ho about going in. They're going to kick everyone's ass. They got all the tools, they got the superior firepower, and they're completely unprepared for the enemy that they face.
Right.
Which does reflect ideas about Vietnam and American soldiers fighting the Vietnamese. Vietnamese were a very different enemy that they were trained for.
And did a completely different style of fighting too, right? I mean, it was more, they knew their location that they were in. It was all in the jungle. They could, they could hide. U.S. troops weren't used to that kind of fighting.
Exactly.
We were trained to fight, again, something very similar to World War II, where it would be large battlefields, generally fighting the same types of enemy and equipment tanks,
So
helicopters,
enemies who had the
planes.
same tactics and training
Yeah.
as our soldiers.
Yeah, and again, the idea of a conventional war versus hit and fade.
Yes. So the Vietnamese fighters were used more guerrilla tactics. And we see that with the xenomorphs here. They're going through the walls and the ceilings and popping up from behind and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then they're
it's-
hiding like within the kind of machinery of the substation that they go up, because they don't even know that they're there.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Marines are relying on their technology. They got these motion trackers and they're like, it's getting closer, 3 meters, 1 meter. That's in the room. Where are they? They don't think in the ducts, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Is
and
it-
like with the infrared, when they're in the hive and they switch to infrared, and it's like they didn't even know what kind of animal they're dealing with,
Right.
if heat
Right.
sense is going to do it, and it didn't.
It
And
didn't.
yeah, it just totally, overconfidence meeting underpreparedness.
Yes.
I was thinking too, and when you mentioned that, the kind of individual Marines within that squad, that Hudson or I'm sorry, Hicks is the one that is.
I get Hicks and Hudson confused.
Yeah.
I know sometimes I don't know why, but
Yeah, we're like
Bill
the
Paxton is
lieutenant. He did too.
amazing.
That's right. He did.
Yeah.
But he's kind of like the more, I don't know that he's the more qualified, but he's always kind of like quiet, like kind of in the background a little bit. In that, even though he's part of this camaraderie, he still is more thoughtful than
Is more level-headed.
other soldiers. Yeah, more level-headed.
Yeah, I think he
Well, they're
was. I think
Yeah,
his
go on.
rank was corporal, so he would have been right underneath the sergeant. So he was kind of on his way to
Mhm.
NCO position. But yeah, he's the most level-headed.
Yeah. Which is why Ripley says, okay, now that, the lieutenant's incapacitated, the sergeant's dead,
Mhm.
Hicks is the one in charge. And we get a sense of how cool he is under pressure during the drop sequence when he's sleeping on the drop ship.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Hudson, by contrast, is panicking all over the place. Game
Yeah.
over,
Yes.
man. And there are some great lines, some classic lines in this movie.
And then I think those are all like Bill Paxton's lines are improvised too.
I think so too.
Game over, man, is his line too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well.
And when you get further into the movie, and Hudson is talking about, I was short 4 more weeks and out. It's his survival instinct that's kicking in. That hey, I almost made it to this point, and then at the end when he finally kind of snaps back into it and he functions as a good Marine, it's just before the end.
Yes.
But again, it's that idea of the overconfidence. He's just used to walking over everything, and when the plan goes wrong, he short circuits.
Yes. And he's the one, when they're getting ready to make the drop, telling Ripley about all the weapons they have and their superior firepower and all these things. And yeah.
And she's just kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
just wait. And it's interesting too, in that I was thinking about this as I was watching, especially like those battles, and that, by the end of the movie, once the bullets run out of the guns, that's it, right? So a character like Ripley has to kind of like think about, okay, how am I going to, kill the queen alien? And it has to be, and it turns out to be hand-to-hand combat in a sense. So you can't always rely on, even though Aliens is like very heavy on guns and even like flamethrowers and stuff and explosives and stuff. It comes down to a very simple, well, I wouldn't say simple, but kind of that hand combat, because you can't always rely on.
Exactly. So Ripley has to improvise quite a bit, which brings me to the point of foreshadowing, because there's tons of foreshadowing in this movie. You know the concept of Chekhov's gun? Well, here we have Chekhov's power loader. We have Chekhov's tracking bracelet, all the stuff that's just introduced. Oh, here. And it's going to play out later on. I mean, there's really no other reason for that technology or those things to be introduced. And I think a really good story point, though, is, Ripley's demoted. She can no longer be a pilot, so she has to work on a dock.
Right.
Which is how she learns how to use the power loader and all of this stuff. And it's the fact that she's able to do that she's able to succeed in the end. So even though she was demoted and mocked for not being what she used to be, she's able to take all of her skills, and she has to rely on those new skills that she learns in order to be able to survive.
And it's interesting is because part of that what lures her back is, Burke's kind of telling her that, if she goes, she can, kind of come back to being or get her lieutenant status.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though, it's funny because that's the only thing that's always been a little bit odd to me, in that where she kind of got the lieutenant part, because in the first movie she's a warrant officer. So is that the same thing? It's not really the same thing, is it?
I don't think so.
So I've always wondered where that lieutenant position came from, but it's it's probably here nor there. But.
Right. So one of the innovations of this particular movie and the franchise is that it introduces or explains more about the xenomorph social structure. In the previous movie, it was just, we saw how the alien, what the life cycle was, from egg to face hugger to chest burster to full-blown xenomorph. But now we see how they interact with each other. So what is that social structure like?
It's almost like insects to a degree. The way, if you haven't seen the movie, I mean, shame on you because it's an awesome movie. But the way that the structure works out is, there's a queen alien that is the one that's laying all these eggs. And if you read some of the novels or the graphic novels, there's also a structure of hierarchy inside with the other xenomorphs. There's warrior ones, which are more heavily armored, that defend the queen and defend the nest. There are the worker ones, which are the ones that go out and bring the prey back in. And they are very much, to a degree, they're not too, I would say, animalistic. There is intelligence to these things. It's not just that they're completely operating off of instinct. A lot of it is they are observing what is happening with their prey and then adapting to that.
They learn and adapt.
And especially, when there was not much resistance at the colony, when the outbreak first went through, they took everybody, and then they kind of hid out in the nest. And then it's not until more humans come in and start messing with them that they come back out in force.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And also like the defense mechanism that it has, right? The aliens always had this defense mechanism of acid for blood.
Yeah.
So it's hard, I mean, they don't, the Marines don't necessarily know that at the time, but I mean, that's, a big part of it. And I was thinking too, and I know that this is kind of explored a little bit more in the other sequels, like Alien 3, for instance, that the alien
essentially
like takes on the form of whatever hosts plants. Like for instance, there was, in Alien 3, there's a test picture out of a dog, and it has that, once it gets to the adult form, it's kept, and it has that form.
Yes.
And I was thinking too, in terms of like, there's that scene where the rest of the crew is kind of holed up into, I don't know if they're still, and I think they're still in the substation or whatever, and the aliens are coming in and they don't know where they're coming in from, and then Ripley looks up, and Hicks goes up with his flashlight and looks, at the ceiling, and it has like aliens like actually look like they're rolling.
Right.
So that. So you wonder, like, what form did it take there?
Jason, you, I think, made a good point in that it's not until the Marines get there that kind of stirs them up. When they're left alone, they stay to themselves. And that's actually mentioned earlier in the movie, when during Ripley's hearing, she's told that there's been a colony on this planet for 20 years and no one's ever seen an alien.
Right.
Yeah, and then once they realize that there's the potential for prey again, and all of a sudden it picks back up, and it's pull everything, go back and
Hmm.
hatch more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of too is like, how how they, how they kind of stir that up and have that attack on the colony is not like really explained. But if you look at like some of the deleted scenes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
especially with Newt's family, they
Yes.
her family kind of goes off into a direction where they shouldn't be
Mhm.
going.
Yeah, that's
And,
part of the extended
right,
director's version that was released in 1990. They added that information back where Newt's family, it's a little unclear because Burke sent a message to go explore this region of the planets where the alien ship was. And then Newt's family call in and say, hey, if we find something out here, do we get to keep it?
mhm,
Right. So anyway, the suggestion is, Burke sends them out there, and that's what causes the infestation.
right.
Yeah, starts it. Yeah. There's actually a really good novelization that is like a prequel to Aliens that's called River of Pain. It's a tie-in to that message being sent out and then the colonists going out and then basically leading right up to where aliens, where the Marines, the second round of them are being deployed with
Okay.
Ripley. So if
Interesting.
anybody gets a chance, that one's pretty good. It's
That's
called River of
that's a
Pain.
not it's a novelization. It's not like
Yep,
one
it's
of the
a
comic books, right? It's a
yep,
novelization.
it's a novel. Yep.
Cool.
So going back to the idea of the xenomorph social structure, that gets foreshadowed too, because when they go into the power station there, Hudson mentions something about it being a hive, like with ants. And then Vasquez
Yeah.
corrects him and says, ants don't have hives. You're thinking of bees.
Right.
But in either case, that foreshadows the idea that, well, if they're insects, then there's probably a queen. And of course, the climax of the story is all about meeting the alien queen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And seeing how much bigger she is compared to all the other ones.
And that leads into one of the big themes of the movie, which is pregnancy and motherhood. How do we see that represented in the movie?
Well, I mean, there's, the obvious connection between, human wise between Newt and Ripley. And,
Mm-hmm.
What you do see in the extended version is that Ripley, way back when had a daughter.
Yes.
And her daughter died since she was, Ripley was missing for 57 years. Or
Yes.
passes on. And, and so Newt becomes this kind of like surrogate daughter.
Mm-hmm.
For her. And I mean, the whole chest burster thing is all about a weird, kind of like maybe fear of pregnancy, as something coming through your body,
Right.
or something, kind of alien coming through your body. And then, the growing up and
yeah.
And then the queen mother is the one that has her little minions and they're all her children as well.
Right.
And birthing sequence.
Yeah, and you see her laying eggs, which is very birthing imagery. Yes.
Right.
But also the idea, and this is directly stated, that when the face huggers, latch onto you, they impregnate you.
Yeah.
And Ripley points that out. Then when Burke traps them in the medical center with the loose face huggers, his plan was to impregnate them with these alien embryos in order to smuggle them back to Earth. So, tons of pregnancy imagery and ideas of motherhood being expressed.
Yeah.
So in many ways, this is about a movie about motherhood.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And like with the relationship between Newt and Ripley, it's kindred spirits. They're the last survivors.
The final girls.
Yeah. And it's brought up where, Hudson's like, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And, Ripley's like, this kid has lived longer than you have, and she's had no training. He's like, what do we put her in charge? It's like, she probably would have done better. Just listen to her.
And two, I mean, at the end, when Ripley lets the queen alien into outer space or launches her into outer space, she comes back and Newt calls her mommy.
Yes. Yes. And I think blowing the alien queen out into outer space through the airlock, a nice callback to the original movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's how she got rid of the original alien in the original movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ripley is, other than Hicks, she is the only person who talks to Newt like a normal person would. Because when the lieutenant and the doctor, are talking to the medic, are talking to her, they're talking, she's got brain lag, she's got this, she's malnourished, but it's like you never really,
Ripley
like
brings her, talks to her and brings her out that way, out of her shock.
Yeah.
Ripley is the mother figure here, the contrast or foil to the alien mother, who wants Newt herself.
Yeah. And I was thinking too that, when Ripley sprays, kind of gives that, or kind of threatens the eggs with the queen mother, and the queen knows what the deal is, and Ripley kind of gives this like, sorry, but I have to destroy you. The queen alien freaks out. This is her children too. You're destroying my children.
That is true. And Ripley didn't need to do that because the place was self-destructing. What was her motivation there?
I think it was revenge for everybody who was
That's
gone.
the sense that I got.
Yeah, because as she's backing out, there is the one egg that hatches, and then that's, like Kelly said, that's when she looks in, she's like, sorry, not sorry, and then starts going after everything. It's like, oh, okay,
gotta go nuke the site for more of it.
Yes.
The way to be sure, right? So
the only way to be sure. Yes.
Yeah. And she's really the one pushing to destroy these things, because she understands what they will do if they get to a bigger population center. The fact that they will just keep going until there's nothing left.
And she says that's why she agrees to go on this mission, is if you kill them all.
Right.
Yeah, not to study, not to bring back, but to destroy them.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So speaking of themes, like I said, the dominant theme is pregnancy and motherhood, but we also get the theme of dreams and nightmares. How do we see that represented?
Well, I mean, you see the first, 10 minutes of the movie, when Ripley gets to the station, the space station, that, she kind of has that, even though it's set up very realistically.
You think it's actually part of the story, but it's a dream sequence.
And it's a dream sequence with the weird kind of like Cronenbergish stretching of the skin, and she wakes up before it actually bursts through. But.
Right. And that is one of her worst fears, is being impregnated with the alien embryo and having it burst out of her body. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And in the dream sequence, it starts out, she kind of wakes up and she's trying to figure out what's going on, and everything seems fine. And then when Burke brings the cat in, the cat freaks out, and it's like, okay, the thing that's supposedly least intelligent in the room is the thing that realizes there's something wrong.
Right.
And again, since Jonesy the cat is the only other survivor of the Nostromo, it's
a call back to the first movie, and that was a clue in the first movie when the alien was around, was Jones freaking out about it.
Right.
Other representations of dreams and nightmares.
I would just kind of like harken back to the end of the movie where Newt asks Ripley, "Can I dream?" And Ripley says, "Yes, honey, I think we both can."
Yes.
I was going to say too, the way that they, humans are moving in this ship, how it starts out is they go into hypersleep. So they're in suspended animation. And then the question that I always had was, are they dreaming while they're in that? And if you're dreaming while you're in that and you're having a nightmare, it never ends.
How do you wake up? Yeah. How do you?
So the movie has a nice bookend, in that it begins with Ripley sleeping in hypersleep when the salvagers come in, and it ends with her and Newt with a close-up on their faces while they're sleeping. So in the beginning it's troubled sleep, and at the end it's more peaceful sleep, but we do again get the same sort of image of their faces as they're sleeping, beginning and end.
It's kind of like they referred to in the first movie as like the Sleeping Beauty ending.
Oh,
yeah.
In the first film.
I did not know that, but yeah, that makes sense. That works.
And then
So it
one of
has a
the other
cyclical
times-
story structure.
You notice too, I think that the music, I know this doesn't have anything to do with dreams and nightmares. I'm kind of calling back to the, to references to the first movie
Uh-huh.
that the music, I think that Horner's use, even though Horner's music is much more kind of much more exciting and bombastic and stuff
Still
but
a really good
the end of
score.
the movie is very
Yeah.
subtle and kind of refers back to the Goldsmith
yeah, and very kind of
the first movie.
calm at the end, like, the nightmare's over
Mhm.
now.
Yes.
Move forward. The other part that you see where you actually see people sleeping is Ripley and Newt in medbay when
Yeah.
Burke lets the aliens in there, and you see that Newt is not sleeping on top of the
Newt
bed
is
like she had
having
been. She's
Under the
sleeping
cot,
on,
yeah.
yeah, she's under the cot, and then Ripley lays with
Yep.
her under that.
And Newt is having nightmares at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely using dreams and nightmares in order to connect Ripley and Newt.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back to the idea of the cyclical story structure, that means that it's inherently comedic in the sense that, comedies start in a state of chaos and resolve into a state of harmony, and that there's a happy ending. And it often plays into the idea of the hero's journey, where the hero is in a world where it's full of problems and has to go off on a journey in order to gain skills and abilities to come back to the world and solve those problems there. So this is very much a cyclical hero's journey kind of story, contrasting the first movie, which was much more linear and much more tragic.
Mhm.
Yeah, because
Great point.
you see at the beginning with Ripley, she's kind of not sure what's going on. She's been gone for 57 years. Everything that she knows has changed.
Yes.
And she's trying to figure out where she fits into it and when she's demoted. And, she goes through this whole process of basically her identity being stripped away. And over the course of the movie, you see her build back up. She's confronting people instead of just letting them walk over her or ignore her.
And there's a kind of callback to that, in terms of Vietnam and soldiers coming back with PTSD and she has PTSD and she even feels like an outsider, among the Marines and it's only until chaos erupts with the aliens that she finds her place and
and the Marines don't even respect her until that point.
Right.
Yeah.
She's not one of them. She's a dock worker, whatever.
Consultant.
Although consultant. Although she does earn some respect from Apone when using the power loader. So she proves that she knows what she's doing.
Right.
Yeah. The scene where after they just wake up and they're kind of working out to, wake up the muscles and everything, and it's Vasquez and the dropship pilot, and she's like, "Hey Vera, who's Snow White?" Because you have this group, this little platoon that they are close knit and they know each other, and Ripley and Burke are complete outsiders. That Lieutenant Gorman is pretty much an outsider too, and so you could already see that there's divisions. Even without them trying.
And look at that scene where they're all eating, how they group up. So the outsiders all eat together, including Lance Henriksen's character, which I'm drawing a blank on his name. Bishop, who is the artificial human. Whom Ripley does not trust, but
and we don't trust either at first, right? I mean, especially when he's when those scenes where he's kind of examining the face hugger and he kind of looks up to one of the crew members asks him a question and he looks up and he's got that kind of really great lighting on him to where it's very kind of shadowy and we don't we don't know what based on what we know of Ash from the first movie we don't know what Bishop's intentions are either.
Exactly. So I do have one question, which is, does Ripley ever make it back to Earth?
It's hinted at in Resurrection. But
well,
I always thought that would make a great alien movie, but it just hasn't. I don't know if it's just the cost of prohibitive or.
So yeah, I mean, definitely in Alien Resurrection, they're on their way back to Earth when the movie ends. But of course, that's not Ripley.
Right.
That's a clone.
Yeah,
Um,
'cause
Yes, that's true. That's good.
Alien. Yeah, when you get to
spoiler,
Alien,
by the way.
yeah, spoiler. When you get to Alien 3,
Yeah.
about your hopes and dreams for everyone who survived Aliens are pretty much crushed in the first 10 minutes, and then it's just picking up the pieces after that in that movie.
Right.
But that kind of ties in to the whole Bishop thing. Because again, spoilers, if you haven't seen it,
Hmm.
there's an alien egg on that ship.
Yes.
And the question is, how did it get on the ship? Because
That's a
the
good
Queen had
point.
lost its, ovipositor,
Yeah.
and Bishop, that drop ship was not where it was supposed to be
That
when
is
Ripley
true.
first came back up. And then you see the drop ship coming up from below instead of coming from,
I never
the
thought
side
about
frame.
that.
Like
I
it,
never made that connection. But yeah, that's a good point. How did the egg get onto the Sulaco?
and that's kind of the thing where Bishop is saying that, it's against my programming to harm or allow anybody to be harmed in it. But he goes through the process of telling Ripley that he had very specific instructions from Mr. Burke what to do with these samples
Yes,
afterwards.
that
It's
is
like, okay.
true.
So it's kind of like, all right, what else did he do that we didn't see?
Interesting.
Because technically, we've never really seen aliens go after synthetic people the same way that they do humans.
Yeah.
That
Like,
is
I mean,
true.
the Queen went after Bishop, but he was the first thing in front of her as she was trying to get to
Exactly.
the humans. So it's just like, I like Bishop, but
So yeah, going back to the question, does Ripley ever return to Earth? Not in the first movie.
no.
And this, in the beginning of this movie, she's on the space station, and then she's demoted, and then later on, Burke and the lieutenant go to her apartment or her quarters. We don't know where that is. We're just told that she's been working as a dock worker somewhere. I assumed on the space station.
So did I.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. In the director's cut, it kind of plays with perception a little bit, and that we do see her sitting in like a park setting, but we find out that that's just basically a hologram that she's sitting in.
Like a simulation.
Yeah. And then the movie ends with them on the way back to Earth, but not there. So yeah, that raised the question, does she ever return to Earth? I don't think she does.
Neither do I.
If you see Alien 3, it's kind of like it's almost like
Pretty much.
The alien is already, I think, busted through somewhere and on another planet.
And if you follow the logic for Weyland-Yutani as the company, Burke makes the argument when he's there about why he sent the colonists out to look for the thing. This is millions and millions of dollars worth of bioweapons that is unclaimed. And I don't think the company would want Ripley to be back on Earth, because then they'd have to keep an even tighter hold on her to make sure she doesn't talk to anybody.
Good point.
Yeah.
Because
we already know how ruthless on her dying anyway, so.
Yeah, and he was going to sabotage the freezers for the Marines, and then jettison their bodies and make up a story. And it's, if you're working for the company and you're getting the company what they want, why would they bother asking questions?
Exactly. Other points about the movie you want to talk about? So that's pretty much my notes.
Yeah.
I did watch an interview where they were talking about Apone, the actor who played Apone, actually had been in the military.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how that squad actually, the actors for the Marines actually did physically train with each other. And
I did hear that.
Training and everything else. Yeah, and so that was kind of one of those subtle things where how they gravitated towards each other was that they had been working with each other for a few weeks before Sigourney Weaver and everybody else showed up, and so they were outsiders technically because they hadn't been part of that training. So it was just, I thought that was a good thing that Cameron did. That was a nice way of putting the division in there.
I think too, he was a Vietnam vet as well, right? I thought I remember reading that as well.
Yeah.
James Cameron has a reputation for being a bag of dicks, but he does generally make good movies. He gets results.
Yes, he does. I also, another little thing of trivia, if you have not watched anything else that had uh, Bill Paxton in it, he is the only actor to have had his characters killed by an alien, a Terminator, and a Predator.
That is true. And I know Lance Henriksen was also in Terminator, though I don't know that he gets killed in that. I don't remember.
Yes,
I think he
yeah,
does.
Probably.
he does, yeah.
Yeah.
In the police station scene.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
the police station. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's kind of it's like when you're watching it, you're kind of like, as a viewer, you would hope you would be like Hicks, but then there's like the part of you that's like, no, I'd probably be Hudson freaking out for the first, for first while until somebody's like, hey, just calm it down and maybe we'll get out of here.
So yeah, that is a cool piece of trivia that he has been killed by a Terminator, an alien, and a Predator.
I also had another thing of trivia that that I know that that Michael Biehn wasn't the first choice to play Hicks. It was the actor named James Remar.
Yes.
And evidently Remar got into a little bit of trouble, legal trouble.
Okay.
Shall we say?
I did not know that. I knew that he was replaced after filming began.
Replaced, yeah.
And I know Michael Biehn didn't want to do it, or Cameron didn't want him to do it initially because the character was too similar to his character in Terminator.
Yeah.
But I think it worked out. I mean, pretty well.
Yeah.
I've been, from what I understand, if you look at like some of the scenes of the Marines, even though with their back to the camera, that they have used at least one shot with Remar.
Okay.
As Hicks.
Okay.
Although I don't know which one it is, but
interesting.
I know that.
Well, there is God, it would have been probably 92 or 93. Back in the day, they used to publish technical manuals, which were basically like explaining what everything was supposed to be. There's a Colonial Marines technical manual that came out in 93. And then for I think it was close to the 35th anniversary, they republished it.
Oh.
And so it explains what all the weapons are, what all the ships are, what all the vehicles are, and kind of gives you a background of why it was this particular squad deployed the way it did, because they figured they had all this high technology that there would be nothing that could really stop them.
Right.
Yeah. So if you could find that one, it's
interesting.
Colonial Marines technical manual. It is well worth it.
Okay.
Cool.
So should we talk about Alien versus Predator?
That was something that had been built up to for so many years in Dark Horse Comics.
Yeah.
And when it's not a terrible movie.
So there's two movies in that sort of mini franchise of Aliens versus Predator. The first one is entertaining. I will say that.
Yeah.
It's not great by any means, but it's entertaining. The second one is not worth watching because it's literally unwatchable. It is so.
The second one is a war crime.
Yes.
Yeah.
I skipped them all out of protest.
So what are some of the how has this movie influenced other movies or pop culture? So we know there were several sequels and prequels to the Alien franchise now.
Kind of, especially the way, again, I keep going back to Weyland Yutani. Sorry, it's just the corporate criticism critic in me, but it did a nice job of reflecting the relationship of big corporation and government working hand in hand with each other.
Yes.
And that kind of filters in that you're seeing that, okay, yes, big corporations do give us a lot of things that help make life easier, but we don't really ask the question of how they developed it and what the costs are to individuals or to groups.
Yes.
I think too that you see a lot more of the, influence wise, like kind of like more of like the production design, especially in like television, science fiction shows. I'm thinking of, something like the newer versions of like Battlestar Galactica, and I know there's several others out there, like maybe The Expanse and things like that. I think you'd see like a lot of Cameron's in terms of the way his movie looked.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a couple of episodes from the new Star Trek TV series where there's a couple of them. One of them in Strange New Worlds does a very good job of kind of bringing the horror of Alien into the Star Trek franchise.
Interesting.
They go to the crew goes to investigate another starship that crashed, and hijinks ensue. And they did a very good job of like meshing aliens and Star Trek together.
Nice.
Super cool.
Yeah, that's a really good episode.
And, you do get references to Alien and Aliens in a lot of different movies and TV shows.
Yes. Most famously that I think of is Spaceballs at the end.
Oh, sure.
Oh, classic. Yes.
John Hurt. Yeah.
Yes. What did he have? He had the special. I'll take a soup.
Or John Hurt just going, "Oh, not again."
Not again.
Yes.
Classic.
That was perfect. That's a perfect one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically
Maybe
Aliens
science fiction.
just had a huge impact on everything that came after it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very dark and gritty version of the future. The fact that things don't
Dystopian.
no matter how
there
good
is
your
a sort of
technology is.
almost a cyberpunk aspect to that, especially in the way that corporations and governments work together.
Privatizing.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And no matter how good you think your technology is, if it fails, it's just you're back to your hands and your brain, so to speak, to survive.
So if you rely on technology too much, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
So and the whole idea of Space Marines, we've seen that represented in other franchises, obviously Avatar, but also video games. Heavy influence on video games like Doom and Halo and that sort of thing.
Also, Warhammer
Yes.
went through the process of their Space Marines and then changed the name to Adeptus Astartes to make it so that you really, if somebody names that, it's going to be, you know what they're talking about.
Yeah, pretty much whenever someone mentions Space Marines, it's your mind goes back to aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about connections to Stranger Things?
Go ahead, Kelly. You had a couple.
Yeah, I had one where it's a little bit more indirectly related to Alien, but when Dustin discovers his pet Dart has kind of broken out of his kind of homemade aquarium, and Dustin kind of picks up the skin.
Yeah.
That tells us right away, just because of our love for Alien and aliens, that the Dart animal that he thought was so cute has now kind of grown into something bigger, even his mother's cat.
Exactly. I was just going to say that after he discovers that Dart has escaped, he finds him eating the cat, who is very reminiscent of Jones.
I was to say also, when Will is rescued from the Upside Down, he has the vine in his esophagus, very much like in Alien.
Yeah, the whole cocooning season.
Yeah, and at the end of season 1, he gets up from the kitchen table and he goes into the bathroom, and I don't know if it was Dart that he threw up, but it was.
It's made pretty clear that it was Dart. I don't know how Dart got from the sewers to Dustin's garbage can, but that was Dart.
But yeah, it was a nice little callback to the idea that he brought something back with him.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, I was thinking too that just reminded me of when Dustin goes to search for Dart. He dresses up in like a hockey mask, but when they introduce him, we kind of see his feet, and it almost looks like the power loader, where Ripley stepped. It's kind of like a mixture of that, and then from Alien, like Ripley's the astronaut suit, kind of funky, that kind of Japanese influenced style that Ridley Scott looked at for the Alien astronauts look. So there's kind of like a little bit of a homage to that, I think.
Yeah. I'll take another look at that. And of course, we've talked before about how the first season was influenced by Alien, and we see Hopper and Joyce go into the Upside Down in those hazmat suits, which are very reminiscent of the spacesuits.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Demogorgon design is based on the Xenomorph.
Right.
And whereas in the first season, we had just the single one, spoiler here, in season 2, we get multiple Demogorgons or Demodogs, which we go from alien to aliens, from the singular to the plural here. And the way that they attack the lab is very much an homage to the attack in Aliens.
Yeah, even down to the dialogue.
Yes.
Right. And especially, with the soldiers of, stay frosty boys, I don't see shit, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that, they have a scientist looking at the soldiers going in to find the Demogorgon with the flamethrowers, and he's looking on the monitors. That's very much a callback to Aliens as well.
And of course, the big obvious connection, Paul Reiser.
Yep, Paul Reiser.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we trust him as another member of a corporation, or is he just as slimy as he was in Aliens?
And we talked before about how, for our generation, when we see Paul Reiser in the beginning of the season, we're primed to distrust him because of his slimy Burke character.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, and even too that Jason had mentioned that we don't, even though he's playing a more like sympathetic character, I think in Stranger Things, and the whole thing about him being transparent and showing Hopper, what exactly they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that'll kind of help him come on his side, but there's still this little modicum of back of your mind is, what is his trick here? What is his plan?
There's a shadiness to him.
Yeah, it's a little shady.
It's too easy that he's telling them all this.
Right. Jason had mentioned earlier the connection with Winona Ryder.
Yeah, being
an
an
Alien Resurrection, technically.
Yeah. And then the scene where she is talking in front of the group of scientists, wondering what happened to her boys. She doesn't distrust them. They're not completely forwarding in any kind of news that they have about her son. That kind of harkens back to Ripley's being kind of confronting the company men,
Yes,
Weyland-Yutani executives, where they're accusing her of blowing up the ship for no reason, but they didn't.
right.
Yeah, that was a really good point, because they, when they're talking to Winona Ryder about Will, it's not that they're talking about her son. It's well, this is what we've seen so far, and we don't really know. It's more like they're talking about an animal,
yeah,
or
a
an
specimen,
experiment, than a person.
Which makes sense, because that's the way that 11 has been treated throughout her whole life.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts or points?
I just love this show. I love Stranger Things. I love how it, not only is it making, homages to Aliens and Stephen King and Steven Spielberg and John Carpenter, they have that great theme.
Yes. And we'll talk about John Carpenter in a later episode, especially The Thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So look forward to that one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This is a love letter to the 80s.
Yes.
Whether it's the music, the fonts, the themes.
Yes.
You could watch Stranger Things and then just kind of build an entire collection of 80s movies or TV shows.
Very much.
Just for little references. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So homework is to look into 3 Mile Island, and the next episode, Dig Dug, which is where we start to see the Aliens references really start to take off, I think. Okay, so I want to thank my guests for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun. Yeah. And thank you for listening. So until next time, take it easy, take care, and stay strange. Stranger Things in the 1980s is produced by Dread Pirate Productions. Cover art is by Sherry Archer. The theme music is Cobalt by Alex Bloxam, used under license from Filmstro. Send questions or topic suggestions to dreadpirateproductions@gmail.com.